The girl came west with her name stitched inside the collar of her dress, tucked beneath a brooch shaped like a mourning dove. Elizabeth Holt, 22, out of Ohio, eyes the color of a storm cloud low on the horizon and a spine harder than the men who'd handled her on the train. She answered the letter with still fingers, heart kept out of it. The ad had promised land, her own home, a fresh start, a husband named Thomas Grady with strong hands and a homestead in the Montana Territory. It promised that he didn't drink, that he didn't hit, that he'd lost one wife to fever and sought a second with quiet temper and honest habits. She wanted none of his warmth, just his fence line and the laws that let her be left alone. She arrived in late April, boots black with cinder soot, standing on the platform at Crossneck Station as the wind peeled her skirts back. There was no man waiting. Instead, a deputy with a peeling lip and one glass eye read her name off a telegram. He did not tip his hat. Grady, locked up, he said. Killed a man, claims self-defense, but Judge Sheffard don't like claims. Trials set for the fall, might swing by winter. Elizabeth didn't flinch. She asked only for the address of his land. You ain't listening, the deputy said, squinting. He's in the jailhouse now, got no say over his property till. I'm his wife, she replied, by post and prayer. My name is Holt Grady. You gonna arrest me too, or tell me where the hell he lives? The jail was a long walk behind her when she found the land, 30 acres in the belly of a shallow canyon. A sagging ranch house with no glass in the windows, just old paper, 3 goats that scattered at her scent, a chicken coop with no chickens, one bay mare half-starved, its ribs like finger bones. She stood in the doorway of what would be her home, alone with wind, dust, and the rattle of wood warping in the sun. She had no ring, no proof of her place. Just a deed signed by proxy and a photograph of Thomas Grady, stiff in a black coat beside a dead deer. Inside the house, a rifle leaned by the hearth. The mattress had lice. She set her bag on the floor and got to work. She learned to shoot before she learned to read. Her father had taught her that. First thing he ever gave her that wasn't bruises. She was small, but she had patience. Patience, her mother used to say, was how birds killed snakes. On the second day, she cleaned the rifle and used it to put a bullet in a jackrabbit's throat. She bled it clean, tanned its hide, and stewed the meat with wild garlic from the creek. No one came looking. She counted that a blessing. The third morning, she rode the mare to the jail. Thomas Grady was taller than she expected, pale, sun-starved, with bruises around his wrists. He watched her through the bars but didn't stand. His left eye drooped slightly. He looked older than his photograph, or maybe more true to it. She waited for him to speak. He didn't. I've taken over your land, she said. I'll tend it until they hang you. If they don't, you can have it back. I never asked for a woman, he said. You did when you signed the form. He looked away. That wasn't me. It was my brother. I never wrote a word of it. She turned to leave. They'll cheat you, he said. You can't run that place alone. You'll be stripped clean by fall. She didn't reply. Outside, a drunk in a rocking chair spat at her boots. Another dumb girl come west to die, he muttered. She stared at him long enough for him to look away. The weeks turned lean. Rain came once in May, then never again. The goats vanished, probably taken by wolves. She trapped voles and rattlesnakes, patched the roof with waxed canvas, traded a batch of pickled beets for a box of nails. She learned the names of the trees, cottonwood, aspen, black pine. She learned which neighbors kept to themselves and which came sniffing after dusk. One man brought her a pie and stayed too long on the porch. She let him look at her, long enough to think himself wanted, then opened the door with the rifle in hand. He left cursing. He did not return. In early June, a letter came from the circuit judge. It said Thomas Grady's trial had been delayed, new date to be set. The body he'd put in the ground belonged to a cattle baron's boy, shot twice in the chest over an argument in the saloon. No witnesses save Grady. The boy's pistol hadn't been found. Elizabeth folded the letter and burned it. She took no sides. She wasn't here for the man. She was here for the land. The first time she bled on the soil, it was from her hands. She'd been digging fence posts, palms raw with splinters. The second time it was from her thigh, a graze from a bullet after a rustler tried to take the mare. She tracked him bleeding through the canyon until she found his camp and took the shot without speaking. When he hit the dirt, his eyes wide with surprise, she leaned down and said, "This land spoken for." She buried him beneath a cairn and said no prayer. Word got around. They began calling her Widow Grady, though no man had died with her name. She kept her distance and folks gave her space, but the land did not. It wanted sweat. It wanted blood. Every inch of pasture had to be rebroken. Her garden bloomed wild with root rot and hornworms. A plague of locusts tore through in mid-July, stripping leaves down to stalks. She watched them from the porch, face like stone. When they cleared, she went out with a basket and salvaged what she could. She never cried, but the lines around her eyes deepened, carved by silence and hunger and the stubborn grit it took to keep breathing. By August, the land had begun to give back. A calf was born in the high pasture. The peach tree flowered despite the heat. She found eggs under the porch, a clutch of hens nesting in secret. She began to speak to the wind sometimes, not in prayer but in warning, "I'm still here." The trial was set for October 3rd. She received the news in a second letter, carried by a boy on a mule. She paid him with a half loaf of cornbread and a jar of elderberry jam. That night she slept with her boots on, dreams thick with fire. 3 days before the trial, Thomas Grady escaped the jail. The jailer's daughter was missing, too. Some said he'd fled to Canada. Some said he'd gone to the mountains to start over as a trapper or thief. The judge offered a bounty. The Baron's men began combing the valley. Elizabeth boarded the windows. She cleaned the rifle again. She milked the goat that had returned, half wild and ornery but alive. The nights came colder. She lit no lanterns. She kept a knife beneath her pillow. She wasn't afraid, not of Thomas Grady, not of the law, not of what might come for her now. Because the land had taken her in. And if he came back, she'd know before he did. The frost set in early, lacing the pasture grass in silver threads. The wind stiffened with the scent of snow that had yet to fall. Elizabeth moved slower now, not from fear or weariness, but calculation. Every motion on the ranch meant heat spent or saved. Feed was measured in handfuls, not scoops. Firewood stacked higher than the pantry. She'd patched the roof twice more and lined the windows with muslin soaked in bear grease to keep the cold from slipping through. She did not go into town, not after word came of the jail break, not when 3 riders in unfamiliar coats circled the house one dusk without dismounting. She stood in the doorway with the rifle cradled, watching them like she might watch wolves in the tree line. They didn't speak, didn't smile, just turned and left, hooves whispering against the frostbitten ground. She spent the next night under the porch, wrapped in a blanket, shotgun across her knees. Nothing came. The day after, she found one of the goats gutted near the fence line. Throat torn, belly opened, liver missing, no tracks, no blood trail. It hadn't been an animal. She buried the carcass without ceremony. She understood it for what it was, a message. The gallows would not decide. The land would. She had buried the dead before. Once in Ohio, a winter baby that hadn't made it 2 nights. She'd been 16, belly round beneath a preacher's coat. Her father hadn't looked at her for weeks. When the child slipped away without sound, she buried it beneath a willow tree with her own hands and never told a soul. The cold didn't frighten her after that. It merely confirmed what she already knew. The world didn't care for the fragile. It only fed the ones who bit back. So when the Baron's men came again, not on horseback this time, but on foot, 3 of them moving with deliberate slowness through the lower field, she watched from the loft with her breath held thin. One knocked, not the door but the porch rail, with the butt of his rifle. "Ma'am," he called, voice thick with molasses and threat. "We just want to talk. Ain't no law against talking." She didn't move. The second man wandered toward the barn. The third lingered near the henhouse, eyes darting. She waited until the first man leaned a little too far toward the door, and then she stepped out from the loft and racked the rifle with a sound like bone breaking. "You've got until I count to 5, she said. He turned, not startled, but wary. "We're looking for Thomas Grady. That's your husband, isn't it?" No, he was just the last man dumb enough to think land could be owned with a letter. "Funny," the man said. "'Cause from where I stand, this don't look like yours either." She didn't speak. She just lifted the rifle an inch. They left before the count reached 3. In the middle of October, she found footprints near the creek, barefoot, long stride, heel heavy, not new but recent enough to warn. She followed them half a mile into the woods before they vanished among the fallen leaves, not a single snapped branch, no sign of fire or shelter. She circled back slower than she came, ears trained for breath, twig, heartbeat. There was no sound, but she felt it. She was being watched. Back at the ranch, she placed salt in the window sills, an old habit. Her mother had believed in such things. Salt, iron nails, a Bible left open to Psalms. Elizabeth did not. She believed in steel, in fences wired twice, in sleeping with her back to the wall. That night she stayed inside. But she did not sleep. Snow came sudden, a heavy curtain that fell in one night and buried the world in silence. The horses stamped nervously in the barn, and the chickens huddled close for warmth. She kept the fire stoked and turned her mirrors to face the walls. She remembered her mother doing that too, after a death, said it kept the soul from wandering back in. But Elizabeth wasn't hiding from spirits. She was preparing for something far more real. On the 4th day of snow, she heard a knock. Not on the door, on the window. Once, twice, slow and deliberate. She didn't move, waited, let the silence stretch. Then it came again. She took the rifle and stepped outside barefoot into the snow, letting the cold sharpen her senses. No footprints, no movement. The knock had come from the eastern wall, where the ground sloped and gave view to the creek. She stood still, waited. A voice reached her, low and hoarse. "Eliza." It wasn't a stranger's voice, it was his. Not like in the jail, not hollow and beaten. Now it sounded like something pulled from the ground, half feral, tired, starved. She did not lower the rifle. Thomas Grady stepped into view with his hands raised. He wore no coat, only a shirt torn at the shoulder and a vest stiff with dried blood. His beard was overgrown, one eye swollen shut. He smiled at her like they were old friends. "I didn't kill that boy," he said. "You have to believe that. I don't have to do a damn thing." He took a step closer. "I came back for my land." "You didn't write for it." He paused. "That don't matter," he said. "It's mine." She pulled the hammer back. "You want the land," she said. "You'll have to fight it for real." His smile cracked. "You'd shoot me, your own husband." "You're no husband of mine." Then she turned and went back inside. He did not follow. But the snow fell harder that night. And somewhere beneath the house, something scraped the earth like a dog digging a shallow grave. By late November he came again, this time with fire. She saw the smoke before the blaze, the barn, flames licking out the roof, embers leaping to the night like sparks off hell's own forge. She screamed at the horse, freed it from its pen, slapped its haunch to send it running. The chickens died screaming. The hay bales went up like paper. The roof collapsed. He watched from the tree line. She saw him silhouetted, still and wordless, backlit by the destruction. She didn't go after him. She went into the house, boiled water, washed her face. The fire didn't reach the house, but it reached her. Something shifted in her chest, old and hard and unnameable. She did not cry. She sat at the table and drank tea steeped from birch bark and stared at the door. Thomas Grady had staked his claim, but he hadn't yet learned what it meant to lose. That lesson would be hers to teach. She buried what was left of the chickens at dawn, scraping a hole through the crusted snow with the broken end of a fence post. The air stank of smoke, feathers singed to ash. Her hands shook from the cold, not from grief. They'd fed her through the leanest months. She gave them earth in return. The barn smoldered for 2 more days. Each morning she walked the edge of it barefoot, ashes sinking under her steps, boots held in one hand. She wanted the land to remember her skin, the way her blood had soaked into it. She wanted the land to choose. Because the law had no voice here, only the winter did, and her. Thomas did not return that week, nor the next. She'd expected him to. A man like that didn't set fire and then wait. But the snow had deepened, swallowing the roads. Perhaps he'd tried to flee and failed. Perhaps he'd crawled off somewhere to die like a lamed coyote. But she didn't believe that. She knew his kind. They circled, waited for weakness, not out of patience, but spite. So she didn't rest. She trapped rabbits in the eastern woods, built a linta where the barn had been, patched from scorched timbers and oiled canvas. When the mare returned, ribs still visible, she wept, not for the horse, but for the fact that something had survived her fire. That meant something else could, too. She began hiding her tools in the field, wedged between roots beneath stones. If he returned and stripped the house, she'd still have the means to rebuild. She dug a root cellar by hand, chiseling frozen soil with a rusted pickaxe, her breath a fog that hung around her like a shroud. By December, her knuckles bled each time she opened her fists. She took no pleasure from the pain. Only proof. The man came in through the well. She heard him on the 12th night of frost, metal groaning, rope rasping against wood, a sound no beast could make. She did not light the lamp. She took the knife from beneath her pillow and waited by the hearth. He stepped through the trapdoor like a shadow unfurling, clothes stiff with ice, eyes sunken. His breath smoked in the air. She spoke first. I left the rifle loaded. I wanted you to see it coming. Thomas looked older than the last time, thinner, snow clinging to his boots like guilt. You sleep light, he said. You don't scare me. He looked around the room like he didn't recognize it. His eyes lingered on the photograph of himself above the mantel. He laughed once, short and bitter. My brother forged my name. Did you know that? I know he's dead, you're not. I should be. She didn't answer. He stepped closer. You think this land's yours. It is now. He pointed to the floor. You've bled into it. I can smell it. But that doesn't make it yours. Then what does? I was born with nothing, he said. But I worked, hard, dug my hands into this earth, made it give, until they took it all. So you burn what's left. I came back to start over. You came back to steal what you lost. They stood there, the room quiet, but for the wind pushing through the chimney throat. Then he said, I don't want to fight you. Then you should have stayed gone. She lunged first. The blade cut his cheek shallow, a red line that beaded fast. He didn't move at first. Then he swung, caught her collar, slammed her against the doorframe hard enough to rattle the window panes. She didn't scream. She drove her knee into his thigh and felt his weight shift. They fell. Wood splintered beneath them. He grabbed the knife, twisted it from her hand. She head-butted him, teeth snapping close enough to taste his breath. Blood, sweat, something older. Her fingers found the fire poker. As she swung, it connected. He collapsed with a groan, one hand to his temple. She didn't wait to see if he rose again. She bound him with the window cords, wrists behind back, ankles knotted tight. He laughed through split lips. What now, Eliza? That name's mine, she hissed, not yours to say. Then she dragged him outside, across the snow, to the place where she dug the root cellar. She rolled him in. Not dead, not yet. But the land was cold, the dark colder still. She sealed the lid, placed stones atop it. Not a grave, not a mercy. Just time. He would survive or he wouldn't. She would tend the fire either way. Through the blizzard that came after, she kept the hearth burning bright. Days passed without count. She chopped wood until her hands split. The wind screamed louder than memory. On the third morning, she returned to the cellar. The stones had shifted. She knelt, listened. Nothing. She opened the hatch. He was gone. No footprints, no blood. Only a broken nail lodged in the wood and a handful of teeth. She sat there a long time, staring at the emptiness. Then she whispered, not in fear, but acknowledgement, "You chose the land too. Not law, not justice, not revenge. Only survival." But she had survived better. She would again. At winter's edge, the Baron's men returned. Not to ask questions this time, but to claim what they believed was left. They brought fire again. 3 torches. 2 guns. 1 rope. She was waiting with powder packed tight beneath the snowbanks and her father's rifle balanced across the sill. The first man dropped without sound. The second screamed long enough to wake the crows. The third begged. She let him crawl back to town with a hole through his calf. He left blood all the way to the canyon's lip. After she walked the field where their boots had pressed the land flat, she looked down at the tracks. Then she stomped them out with her own, each print heavier than the last. Spring did not come so much as crawl in under the doorframe. The drifts melted in slow surrender. Ice peeled off the troughs in thick slabs. Roots, stiff and blackened, began pushing up green like bruises healing from underneath. Elizabeth watched it all with a stillness that had nothing to do with peace. There was no celebration in surviving, only the need to keep surviving. She sharpened her tools, rebuilt the fence line with timber taken from the burnt barn. She hung the teeth she'd found in the root cellar above the threshold, knotted on a string. It made the neighbors nervous when they came, which suited her fine. No one mentioned Thomas Grady again, not the sheriff, not the Baron's men. The story had bent. Some said he died in the blizzard. Some said he'd wandered north and was eaten by wolves. One drunk swore he saw Grady in Butte, dressed as a priest, face ruined, talking to shadows. Elizabeth said nothing. She didn't believe in ghosts, but she did believe in men who died slow. And the land hadn't rejected her yet. She took in a child that June, a girl no older than 10, found sleeping in the ruins of an old line shack 2 ridges east. The child had no shoes, no name she'd give, just one eye swollen shut and fingers curled like claws from frostbite. Elizabeth didn't ask questions. She fed her bread, wrapped her feet, and let her sleep in the loft. The girl didn't speak for 3 days. When she did, it was only one word: fire. Elizabeth didn't press her. That night, she placed a second rifle in the girl's hands, just to see. The way the child held it, back straight, arms firm, was enough to make Elizabeth feel something like memory stir inside her. Not warmth, not even kinship. Recognition. This one, too, had crawled through the dark and come out sharpened. By August, they had a rhythm. The girl, who still hadn't offered a name, milked the goats, tended the coop, carried stones to strengthen the walls. Elizabeth traded into town once a month for flour and news. She didn't bring the girl. She didn't bring a name, either. Just nodded when folks called her Widow Grady and didn't ask for more. One morning, the girl pointed to the teeth above the door. "Yours?" she asked. Elizabeth shook her head. "Someone else." The girl didn't ask whose. She didn't need to. That fall the harvest came rich and fast. Apples from the gnarled tree near the creek, squash fat as lungs, potatoes red as liver. They stored them in a new root cellar built deeper, stronger. Elizabeth reinforced the door with iron latches, hung a bell inside it just in case. She began marking days on the inside of her coat, not to count how long she'd survived, but to know exactly when she'd stopped waiting to die. It was sometime between the last frost and the first egg the hen laid without hiding. She never told the girl. Some things you only said once they were over. And this was. In October, two men from the north came riding, not law, not drunks, quiet, careful. They spoke with the accent of Dakota men and didn't touch their guns unless asked. Said they were looking for Thomas Grady. Said they'd heard he wasn't dead. Elizabeth stared at them with her arms folded. "He's gone," she said. The taller one looked around the land, the fences, the fields. "Yours now. It always was." They nodded and left without more questions. That night she didn't sleep. She cleaned both rifles, taught the girl how to load and reload in the dark, let her miss 3 times before she said, "Now again, with your eyes closed." The girl didn't argue. Next shot cracked straight through the bottle. Elizabeth let herself smile, small, barely there. Then she buried the rest of the bottles deeper. She didn't like waste. First snow came early again, dusting the roof like ash. The wind carried a scent she hadn't smelled in a long time, sweat, wood smoke, blood beneath cold leather. She waited 3 days before lighting a lantern. On the 4th, she went to the creek and found the cairn disturbed. The one where she'd buried the rustler who tried to take the mare. Stone shifted, dirt clawed back. Not recent, but not old either. She didn't panic, she didn't run. She poured salt around the base and walked back to the house with the calm of someone who knew how to make ghosts stay down. That night, she told the girl a story. Not about Thomas, not about fire. About the land. How it took you in if you bled for it. How it watched you and remembered. How it didn't let go. The girl didn't speak, but her eyes stayed open long after the fire burned low. Near midwinter, a traveler came through in the night. Ragged, one boot missing, fingers frostbitten to bone. Elizabeth found him leaning against the barn post, half frozen, knife clutched in his lap like a promise. He whispered one word as she approached, "Grady." She raised her rifle. "What about him?" "He's not dead, he's not gone, he's underneath." "Underneath what?" The man shuddered, eyes rolling. "Under the land, under everything." "He died before morning." She burned the body, let the smoke drift north. Then she knelt in the snow and pressed her palm to the earth. She felt nothing, but she knew. Thomas Grady was not done. And neither was she. The blizzard that came with the new year was the worst in 3 generations. Wind tore shingles loose like teeth. Ice formed inside the walls. The goat froze standing, eyes wide, as if it had seen something in the dark that had come for it with patience. Elizabeth and the girl, now called Lark, because she'd once whistled like one in her sleep, huddled in the root cellar for 3 days with salted meat and paraffin lamps, listening to the creak of wood and the groan of snow settling heavy above their heads. They didn't speak. Words were brittle things in weather like that. You held them too long, they broke. When the storm passed, the world looked stripped of time. White coated the hills, the trees, the remains of the first barn. Only the house stood untouched, and the chicken coop, though half the roof had caved in. Elizabeth stepped outside and saw something she had not seen since the first year. Footprints, one set bare, deep. Coming up from the east ridge, circling once around the porch, then vanishing into the ravine where the earth split like a scar. No return trail, no drag marks. Lark stood behind her, silent. Elizabeth asked, "You see anyone?" "No, not even in your sleep." The girl's breath fogged. "I don't sleep anymore." Elizabeth nodded. Neither did she. That week the root cellar door unlatched on its own 3 separate times. No wind, no animal tracks, just wide open, bells swinging in the stillness. On the 4th time, they found prints going down the steps. Elizabeth descended with the rifle. Nothing, no sound but a slow drip from the stone wall, like the ground sweating out secrets. She ran her fingers over the crates, everything in place, no one hiding. But one of the teeth from above the doorway was missing. Not dropped, removed. She didn't speak of it. Some things once said gained shape. Instead, she planted new salt lines, set traps, dug narrow pits near the edge of the property and sharpened stakes at the bottom. She moved the sleeping pallets to the attic and nailed the ladder up after dark. Every sunset now came with silence, not calm, not even fear. Just the quiet of something returning. One evening, the mare came back blading. Deep gouge across the flank, bitten, not cut. Elizabeth spent hours stitching the wound by lamplight. The mare didn't flinch. When she finished, Lark asked without turning her head, "Was it him?" Elizabeth didn't answer. Instead, she said, "If he comes again, he won't be whole." "Will he be worse?" "No, just less." Lark looked down at her hands. You could let the land have him, let it finish what it started. Elizabeth thought of the well, the cellar, the teeth. "He belongs to it now," she said, but not all of him went down. In late February, they found the dead man buried beneath the snow near the north fence. Not Thomas, another, younger, knife through the throat, no boots, hands burned. Pinned to his coat was a square of paper, stiff with ice. One word scratched on it, in charcoal. Traitor. Elizabeth burned the note, kept the coat. Who he was didn't matter. Who had written the word did. The land had begun to speak back. She could feel it. At night she lay still and heard the breath beneath the ground. A deep, low hum like a beast chained and dreaming, waiting to rise, something born in blood and hate and winter. Thomas Grady had fed it. Now it wanted more. One night the snow melted faster than it should have, as if heat bloomed from inside the soil. Steam rose in coils around the well. The trees dripped but did not thaw. When Elizabeth stepped outside, the air stank of copper and wet stone. She followed the trail past the root cellar, past the henhouse, to the ravine. Lark came behind her, bare-armed, carrying a torch. They saw it together. A man taller than Thomas had been, broader or maybe just twisted by cold and time, standing where the creek used to run, wearing a coat stitched from hides and gunnycloth, face hidden beneath a veil of wire. One hand was missing, the other held nothing. Elizabeth raised the rifle. The thing didn't move. "I told you," she said, "you don't belong to me." The figure cocked its head. Then it spoke, not with a voice, with the sound of earth cracking open. You buried me wrong. She didn't blink. You didn't die. You fled. Same thing. She stepped forward. You want the land, take it. But know this, every inch has my blood in it now. Every fence post, every stone. You'd have to rip me out root and bone. The thing didn't answer. But Lark raised the torch, and it flinched. Not from fire, from light. Elizabeth saw then it was hollow. The coat puffed, but there was no breath. The boots shifted, but left no print. He'd been shed of what made him man. What stood before her was hunger wearing a face. She didn't shoot, not then. Instead, she walked forward and said, soft but sharp, I'm not yours. And then she thrust the torch into the chest of the thing that had once been Thomas Grady. It screamed not aloud but through every pine tree for a mile. The snow buckled beneath them. The ground shivered. The birds burst from the trees as if shot. The coat went up. The figure folded. What remained was a blackened mark in the soil. Elizabeth dropped the torch and spit into it. Then she turned to Lark. We plant here next year. Spring came quiet. No more footprints, no more knocking. The earth lay still, not dead but satisfied. The wind spoke softer, through whole branches instead of broken ones. They rebuilt the barn, named each goat, raised a new wall around the garden from the stones pulled from the ridge. When the townsfolk came again, asking if the widow Grady needed anything, she met them with a half smile and a firm hand. No, she said, the land provides. They believed her. Because her eyes didn't lie. Because the house had no locks. Because whatever had tried to come for her was gone now. Fed to the roots. And the girl at her side, barefoot, smiling, calloused and strong, was not a daughter nor an orphan, but something better. A witness. They had survived the man. They had survived the law. And now, with blood still in their boots and the past laid to rest beneath the furrows, they would shape the land with their hands. It was theirs, and it had chosen them.